Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Übergabe podcast. Christian and I are back together, and today we're recording an episode with an exciting topic because today we're talking about the Berlin Counselling Center for Nursing Staff with Foreign Qualifications. I had to cheat for a moment.
Eva, how did we come to this topic?
Yes, how do we get to this topic? First, we've always talked about the integration of nursing staff from abroad or international nursing staff in the past. And we received an inquiry from Debora Aust. Perhaps you would like to introduce yourself. She is also our guest today. And we want to focus more on this topic and delve deeper into it, or take another specific look at how it is implemented in Berlin. As an example, perhaps we can then also transfer this. That's why we've joined forces.
Debora Aust is here at the virtual table and would like to talk to us today as an expert. Hello, Debora.
Hello, Christian and Eva. Nice to be here.
Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today about the topic. So we have today the opportunity to focus on Berlin again. But before we get into the topic, why don't you introduce yourself? Who are we talking to and why are you the expert on this topic?
My name is Debora Aust. I am the founder of DAREconsulting. That's the sponsor of the BBeFaP Counseling Center. And I have been working as a senior counseling consultant in Brandenburg and Berlin for over 10 years. So we support companies in the integration of international skilled workers and immigration processes and everything that goes with it. And since June, we have been asked by the Senate Department for Science, Health and Care in Berlin whether we should run this counseling center. And of course, we gladly accepted, and that's how we got involved.
So tell me, why did the Berlin Senate Department for Science, Health and Care approach you in the first place? What is the basic idea behind this position?
Berlin has the same problem as the rest of Germany. The shortage of skilled labor in the care sector is a huge issue. In other words, we have an aging population in Berlin, and we cannot adequately meet this demand with trainees in the care sector. As a result, the Berlin Senate Department for Science, Health and Care has been thinking about how this can be improved. One of the major problems in Berlin is that recognition processes are sometimes not utilized by nursing staff, are not carried out, or are started but not completed. This means that we have international care workers who work in the auxiliary sector in Berlin, but are not fully fledged care workers because they have not been recognized. And the combination of these two aspects plus companies that need help with the integration of international staff has led them to say that we need an office that bundles and manages the whole thing.
Interesting. Does that already answer the question of what exactly this counseling center is? Or do you perhaps have more information on how the structures are set up or what the aim is beyond that?
Exactly. So there are two pillars or two legs to this center. One is what I just mentioned, that we support both international skilled care workers and companies in the immigration recognition and integration process. One can call us, send us an email or WhatsApp. We use all kinds of channels to support the inquiries that come in. And the second pillar is an information platform. This means that by the end of the year, there will be an information platform on berlin.de under the Senate Administration's care page that will bundle all the information which is needed for international nurse staff with a foreign qualification or a company that is potentially hiring or has hired nurses from abroad. Recognition processes will be explained. We will have flowcharts. We will have FAQs that are created from the counseling questions, but also positive examples, i.e. best practice. We hope that we can make a few films where nurses share their experiences. And of course, documents to download, be it recognition forms or other things that already exist. These are the two main focuses of the Counseling Center. And in the future, in 2025, there will also be integration concepts for companies. But that's still a bit up in the air.
So that means it's about nurses who has come here from abroad or has a foreign qualification or have explicitly come to Berlin. Then there seems to be a bigger hurdle, both on the part of the company and on the part of the nurse, to obtain the full qualification. And that's where you come in and advise both the health staff and the companies, if I've understood correctly.
Yes, that can be a case. The cases we've had since June, that's when we started, are very multi-layered and complex, I have to say. When it comes to recognition, the recognition process is often very opaque or difficult to understand for someone who doesn't come from Germany and is not familiar with our administrative procedures. On the one hand, we hope that we can make this process a little more transparent by helping to collate all the documents. On the other hand, there is the problem of what needs to be translated. The certificates must be translated, sometimes even with apostilles. This means a lot of documents have to be collected in the home country. Who can translate this at all and is allowed to translate it so that it is recognized? Then what level of German is needed to be recognized? These are also questions. If I am already in Germany, where can I do this? Who will help me? Is it the employer who can support me? Are there any funding projects that might support me? And then also the submission to the LAGESO, the State Office for Health and Social Affairs, where these applications have to be submitted. Fortunately, this can be done online and works relatively well. But then there are sometimes questions. If the documents are not complete, questions come back, and that is, as far as we know, very technical. And it's relatively difficult for someone who comes from somewhere else. And that also overwhelms a lot of companies. A lot of care facilities are overwhelmed. And then if the application is more or less successful, there is a so-called recognition decision. This is a notice that states that I am partially recognized. Full recognition from abroad is very difficult. I haven't experienced that yet. This means that most nursing staff with a foreign qualification either take a knowledge test or a post-qualification program. In other words, they go on the course and top up the knowledge they lack. And that also takes a long time. That's a bit like the recognition process, which is very difficult and very lengthy.
Lengthy, you say? How long does such a recognition process usually take?
From the beginning, with the paperwork, 3 months, 4 months. It depends a bit on how good the documents are and whether there are any follow-up questions. But to complete the recognition process, you must have B2, which is the European framework definition of language level. And of course, you don't necessarily already have that. That means you must learn German and then take the knowledge test. Fortunately, there is a preparatory course. This is available in Berlin. But of course, failing the knowledge test is also a disadvantage. And that's why you have to prepare intensively for it.
Now tell me, how many people does that actually, in other words, how high is the demand for people to use, okay, definitely need a counseling center? Because I hear that the federal state of Berlin is apparently interested in bringing in or employing nurses from abroad. Therefore, it's also opening up and has somehow recognized the need. But how many people are we talking about?
The monitoring of the Berlin labor market for skilled workers has shown that around 9,000 vacancies cannot be filled by 2030. These figures should always be treated with caution. Of course, we are working on the basis of today's assumptions. However, this means that there may be a shift because more people may choose nursing care as a training program after all, but it can also shift because there are even fewer people taking up this training. Many will retire in the next 2 to 5 years. This means that nursing will lose an extremely large number of well-trained people, long-serving skilled workers, because they are retiring. And as a result, these gaps, which have already been defined at around 10,000, are, of course, something that you have to take care of and can't just let it lie. Let's put it that way. And I think the great thing about this counseling center is that, on the one hand, it offers this support structure, both in terms of documentation via the internet platform and also as an advisory structure. And on the other hand, we do a kind of analysis to find out what goes well and what not. Why is it not working the way we want it to? What challenges do companies and nursing staff with foreign qualifications face in order to gain a foothold in Berlin and work happily? Let's put it that way.
How are you set up at the counseling center? Because, I mean, you come from the field of business consultancy. Where did you get your knowledge specifically in relation to care, and what kind of people work at the counseling center?
Well, there are 3 of us, a team of women. For the last 6 years, I've been running a support project in Brandenburg, also an information counseling center. This means that I specialized in the legal and integration side, more on the corporate side. In other words, what one needs in terms of residence permits, or what does it take for a company to integrate well. That's my expertise. And then we have someone from Berlin who comes from the relocator sector. That means she mainly covers all the social integration issues, for example, school housing, but also clubs, registration, dealing with the authorities, bank accounts, everything that is part of daily life, especially at the beginning. And then we also have an administrative employee who helps with the administration. And you ask why we are strong in care. I have written intercultural concepts for hospitals and care units, and we have used them to ensure that trainees also acquire intercultural competence. There is a seal of approval for fair recruitment in nursing. It has a documentation, an information brochure, and we wrote it so we know this recognition landscape and situation of international nurses very well.
In the last few years, the ICN has stepped into the landscape and said, okay, we need to take a more critical look at the recruitment processes because they don't always take place in an ethical manner. And the ICN has recently commented on this again. Does this seal of approval fulfill the criteria?
Yes, well, it does. The seal of approval is not to certify nurses, but should support the nurses who is in their home country. It's for the agencies. The big problem in Germany is that any kiosk salesperson is allowed to recruit. So there is no certification or check as to whether someone is suitable to recruit. And that's why this seal of approval is really the only point at the moment where companies can orientate themselves as to whether a recruitment agency is certified. In other words, they know that they are subject to a certain standard. I think the seal is going into its second round. So the companies that are certified in the first round have to get recertified, and there is a point of reference. The big problem behind this is that these agencies, which are based in Germany, do not recruit in foreign countries, but local partners do this. Of course, they are not certified, and that is a bit of a challenge. We have also had nurses at the counselling center in Berlin, for example, from India, who have asked whether this is a reputable agency and whether it even exists in Germany, etc. Fortunately, there are now also agencies in Germany that can offer their services. Fortunately, there is now a certain degree of sensitization among care workers abroad to ask questions before they sign a contract, before they give money, before they get into debt. I think that's a very good development. I only know it from India because we've just had a few cases from India. We are also working closely with the seal to ensure that one or two agencies in Berlin work according to the standard.
From the company side, let's assume the perspective. I was somehow the head of nursing in a Berlin hospital or another facility. I then turn to you, and what counselling do I get from that perspective? Because if I've understood correctly, you already support the nursing staff very intensively. And what is the role of the companies, or what is the cooperation like?
Well, I have to say that many clinics in Berlin usually have their own department, be it a recruitment or HR department. There are also clinics in larger organizations that don't just have clinics in Berlin, but nationwide. And they don't need us because they know how the process works. They have their fixed contacts where they recruit abroad. And they usually also have an integration officer somewhere, be it an integration officer or an integration department specialist or whatever. So they have someone who more or less takes care of the whole thing. In other words, we are happy to advise them if they have any questions. They tend to come more for the funding questions. So when they say, I'm looking for a German course, I somehow have 5 skilled workers who have been recognized, but in practice, the German level, it's just not as it should be. What options are there for me to apply for funding for these courses? We are already being asked that. And the smaller care facilities, those with around 100, 150, 200 employees, we work more closely with them because their subjects are more about where can I get the skilled staff? So they often don't have as many opportunities to know who they can turn to, how the whole procedure works, and what they have to expect financially. And that is our main task, to give them structure. Please think about writing an integration concept before the nurse arrives. Think about perhaps informing the staff that international nursing staff will be arriving soon. How do you want to integrate them? What questions are there? So most workforces have fears about this. And that's where we support the companies. We explain that a staff meeting is a good way to address these fears, get people together, tell them the positive aspects if you get support, etc. To convert the whole process before the arrival of a new skilled staff is a good one. The whole process before the nurse arrives, then also onboarding is a big issue for companies. So what structures can I use? What checklists have already been drawn up? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We supporting them so they have an onboarding process that is sustainable. And I think it's very important that these structures are not set up for nursing staff with foreign qualifications, but that they apply to everyone, i.e. to the entire workforce, whether a new nurse comes from Germany or from somewhere else. Onboarding mechanisms are then standardized, and that helps everyone. The third point, which is very important and which many people forget, is that the educational pathways of nursing staff from abroad are completely different. We have a lot of nurses who have a bachelor's degree. This means that they have studied for 5 years at a university and then come here. And because they are partially recognized, i.e. they can't yet complete the recognition process because they must take an exam, etc. They work in the auxiliary sector. And that's a huge problem because then the staff see them as auxiliary workers, so to speak, but they see themselves as fully fledged specialists because that's what they know and can do. But they are not allowed to do it. So they are forced to remain an auxiliary worker, also in terms of pay, until the recognition is done. In order to counteract this potential for conflict, which automatically arises because we start from very different perceptions and needs, it is important to tell companies that they need to address this. In other words, you need to do some kind of educational work with the workforce about what background people are coming here from.
But of course, it also does something to the people, doesn't it? I mean, they've already completed an apprenticeship in their home country and are coming here.
A degree course.
Possibly even, exactly. And they're in the recognition process here, so to speak, are paid less, aren't allowed to do everything. And this recognition process may take longer because some documents are missing. How do you support this person? Because I can imagine that this also leads to the tensions, including within the person themselves.
We did a study on what is one of the biggest challenges for Berlin nursing staff and trainees from abroad, and that is loneliness. That's actually the biggest issue. In other words, exactly what you described, it creates frustration and, I don't know, am I being taken seriously? Am I being accepted for what I actually was before in my home country? There's also a certain reputation behind it when you've studied and worked as a recognized nurse, which you lose. And if you don't have a social network to support you and say, okay, you'll get through this, it'll just take a while, but it'll get better afterwards, then people become terribly lonely. And to accompany the companies, in addition to the nurse, and to say, be prepared for this. Give them the opportunity to pursue hobbies. I recently had an event where I told the companies quite clearly to make a list of associations, clubs, voluntary activities such as the voluntary fire brigade or whatever, it doesn't matter, but so that they can find a connection outside of work. Knowing that one has to do the recognition, have to get some additional qualifications, have to learn German, have to know how the public transport works in Berlin, etc. Okay, Berlin still has the nice things, it has concerts, it has certain cultural circumstances. There is also a chance that one might find someone who speaks the same language, but one have to find that in such a big city. And if you only have work, further training, German, work, further training, then it becomes terribly difficult to somehow be happy and arrive. And then the employer must be prepared to give you time off and say you'll do German during your working hours, which in turn is difficult because then the care facility says, then I'll miss half the shift. What do I do then? Finding ways out of these conflicts. And that has a lot to do with systemic counselling. What processes can we streamline and simplify so that there is more room for social integration? I've also had companies that have said, there's a mentoring program, the person gets someone to work alongside them, but that's usually technical. It's usually about nursing technology, i.e., what's going on at work, but very rarely something about what to do in the evening if one don't know anyone. They often go to their flat or room, depending on what it is, and that's where they are. We cannot ask their employees to say that there has to be someone there every evening to go to the cinema, have a drink, an after-work beer or whatever. Nobody can do that on top of everything else because most of them have families and have to be able to use their free time in a way that is properly organized.
I would also be interested to know if there are any best practice examples or rules that you give when it comes to integrating different people or different numbers of people into a ward, for example. It may be that hospital is only looking for one person, for example, or that only one person is new there. Does it really make sense to integrate just one person from abroad and let them go through this whole process? Because I think it's important that they somehow have a peer group, isn't it?
Yes, I don't think the peer group has to be in the same ward. It's enough if it's in the care unit. Of course, if you have a lot of people in the same ward or even in the same team, then it becomes difficult, because then, of course, the team is extremely burdened also with the familiarization, because, of course, they all must be trained. And when problems arise, it's difficult to spread them out. So if there is a team of 5 or 10 people and a third of them are new, regardless of whether they are international or not, then they are extremely busy familiarizing themselves with the newcomers. And when international and social issues are added to the mix, it becomes difficult. So from that point of view, per team, one person is much better if there are peer groups within the company, if they want to. We think that just because they come from the same country doesn't mean they have to like each other. It's no different for us. I don't like every German person just because they come from Germany, but it's nice if the offer exists.
You mentioned earlier that you also have a person working with you who supports this social integration and helps with finding accommodation. If I've understood that correctly, how do you go about it? Do you have a network of people you know who are somehow landlords, or how do you fight your way through the jungle?
Exactly, she has a network and knows where to find apartments. I have to say that at the moment in the counseling, we don't have the problem of finding an apartment so much, because most care facilities already have some accommodation at the beginning. So they have these houses where the care workers can stay at first. So from that point of view, we are lucky that we haven't had to climb that Mount Everest yet. But she could, I know that. That's why she's on the team. We said, okay, so that we'd be prepared if support were needed. But luckily, it's not like that yet.
In our question pad, we also asked a question along the lines of what significance the integration of nursing staff from abroad has for the German healthcare system, both socially and politically. Do you have any ideas about that?
Well, I think as teams become more diverse, the easier it is to find solutions, because we all somehow always think in our structures and can't see the forest for the trees. And of course, it helps to have someone who, for example, has had a completely different work experience, because they have worked in their home country as a qualified nurse, and also has different approaches to creating solutions. At the moment, of course, many care facilities are also struggling with digitalization, and here German gets in the way again. So German is a bottleneck in this whole story. If German is not spoken well, then reporting on digitization is difficult, and so they struggle with it a lot and can concentrate less on the innovative solutions that are available. But I think it brings an infinite amount, not only in nursing, but in all professions. We should see migration much more as an opportunity to find solutions that we might not otherwise find.
Yes, let's come back to the BBeFaP again. You said that you started in June, and what do you still want to develop by the end of the year and next year? What other special milestones are there, and where is the road going? Is there a plan to say at a certain point we've done enough and to close the counselling centre? Or what's the future for you?
No, we are super happy that the Senate Department for Science, Health and Care has a long-term plan. The first milestone, in addition to the counseling, is to launch this information platform where other counseling centers in Berlin can also access it. It shouldn't just be an information platform that we use to publish information, but rather a collection where partners and other organizations that provide counseling on other topics can refer to. They can say, yes, download Form X from there. That's where you'll find it. Or if you're looking for process Y, then here is a matrix that shows every single step, which makes it easier to understand. So it is certainly a major milestone. For 2025, the milestones are also to develop best practice videos. So not only always the written word, but perhaps also we are able to show a little live something of how care workers in Berlin are doing. And I think it would be wonderful if we can manage to get a care facility to agree for showing us their inside and showing how they have designed an integration process. To encourage others to follow this path, it is rocky, it is difficult, there is a lot of support, but you really have to want it. And I think it would be nice to have something like that to show as a best practice. We will definitely work on that.
What I'm still interested in, Debora, is maybe something a bit more overarching. And it's also a bit about the political landscape around Berlin. Berlin is somehow in the middle of Eastern Germany, and the political situation around it is changing a bit. I would be interested to know if this change is also causing the problem that many people are leaving again, or that fewer people want to come. Is that noticeable?
Now I can tell from my experience in Brandenburg, I think Berlin is less affected by this. Berlin is more of a magnet for Brandenburg, which is located around it. Yes, you can feel from Brandenburg that it is less attractive for nurses there. And you've actually been hearing that for a long time, even before the political situation changed. The problem is that people prefer to live in a big city where there are more cultural activities than in the countryside. In that sense, Berlin is still more of a center of attraction rather than people saying, no, they're leaving. What we've already mentioned, the housing situation in Berlin is difficult. It's one reason not to come, because many simply say to themselves, we can't afford it, we can't find anything, we don't know how to do it. Especially when family reunification comes, there is the possibility for care workers, once they have their recognition, or in some cases even before, if they earn enough, to have their families join them. That means spouses and children, underage children. And that's great. I think it's really, really great because it also provides a bit of support. It also makes it possible to manage things that aren't going so well at work on a psychological side. So not to have only just the digital call in home country, but having your family locally. From that point of view, that's great and it helps. But yes, when they have to look for a flat, suddenly for 4 instead of just for 1 person, then it becomes even more difficult. So that would be more of a point where Berlin would be not attractive or not chosen. But otherwise, Berlin is still a very attractive place.
Okay. What does it mean for the nursing care sector in Berlin when so many people come from abroad? Well, it also means that companies and, of course, nursing professionals in hospitals and care homes also must change. What does it change? Can you say something about that? Do you have insights?
I would say that Berlin is very colorful already. So compared to other federal states, especially if you think east, Berlin is already a huge step ahead. It's more a matter of maybe having to watch out that it doesn't happen that certain districts are singly living areas for certain groups or certain nations. It's important that people are not saying, okay, if I come from such and such a country, I definitely want to go there because there are similar people. But I have also had examples of international nursing staff who said, I don't want to go where my fellow countrymen and women are because I want to arrive in Germany and not speak Turkish, Arabic, Dutch or whatever. Well, it always depends on the person and he or she is like. But I think nursing facilities have to adapt. But that's a big step. Berlin itself is colorful. But in the facilities, I just see that many of them, especially those that still have management structures that are older, are still stuck in old belief, such as, if you don't like it, then you can leave and then I'll wait for the next person. But this new person does not longer exist. We are no longer an employer market, but rather we have become an employee market. That means that employees can define where they want to go. Because when I was looking for my first job, there were 100 applicants and 1 job, and now it is the other way around. From that point of view, they have to approach it, and many are not yet ready for it.
Which countries do most of the people come from? Is it actually, because you just said, from the Turkish or from the Arab world?
Not many from the EU. Sorry, no. There are many from Poland. But that's also because of the proximity of the border. Of course, you would observe the same when you go to another federal state, which would be closer to the Dutch or French border. Due to the Ukrainian crisis, a great many Ukrainian refugees are entering. Language is a big issue there. They are allowed to work, but they don't yet have the German, not even for recognition. From that point of view, unfortunately, they very often remain in the helper sector. And otherwise, I would say nurses come from all over the world. A great many Spanish speakers from Central and South America, Brazil, Mexico, but of course also the Philippines, Vietnam, more for the training sector. But this is also due to the recruitment mechanisms of the Federal Employment Agency, which of course has defined countries where it is allowed to recruit based on the WHO list. And from there, India is increasing a bit, is also being added, and then from closer, Turkey not so many, I have to say. What I have noticed is that Morocco is also a country where nursing staff come from. Yes, that's the big picture. But actually you can say more or less all over the world.
I think it's totally crazy that on one hand, we are always debating the understanding of care and so on within the profession. And on the other hand, there are so many people from different countries who are somehow flocking to us and into care. And that makes me wonder whether it makes sense to somehow think about a German understanding of care, or whether we perhaps, I don't know, have to take on board other aspects as well, as other care providers may think differently than we do. Care becomes totally colorful, but we somehow define what it is and everyone has to adapt. On the one hand, I think that's great. But on the other hand, I'm a bit worried about what it will end up being, because in the end, we might not be able to define what it actually is and how we want to convey it.
I think it's a super exciting approach to say, okay, couldn't we think outside the box and say maybe there are good approaches somewhere else? I do think that it is incorporated, but maybe not as structurally as you would like, but rather at a very basic level. It's done on a solution-oriented way. I do think that approaches that come from other structures, other countries, are incorporated into care because they are done differently there. I mean, the biggest difference we see is that long-term care in our country tends to be more focused on the body care. I spoke earlier of the bachelor person who has studied for 5 years. In other countries, it is often the case that body care is not provided. It is either done by family members or by special service providers.
You mean personal care?
Exactly. No employee cooks for us. We have a canteen service. So personal or body care is outsourced to service providers, so to speak. This means that the nursing staff are more involved in medical care than in personal care. And we see the problem in the teams in terms of understanding, but we also see it in the training. There are also people who say, oh, nursing sounds cool, I'd like to do it as a training. And then it doesn't matter so much whether they are people with a migrant background with different concepts, or sometimes Germans as well. When they are into it and see, they say, no, it's not what I had in mind, this body care focus. And that's the point that could perhaps be thought of differently at some point. I don't know. Of course, many people struggle with the challenge that there are different ideas.
Well, maybe you have to be open to it. On the one hand, as a care facility, I am looking for people. And I am also saying, okay, I am willing to take people from abroad and employ them here, not just for a short period where I have a shortage, but also in the long term. And that, of course, means that for many people, Germany suddenly becomes the center of their lives. It becomes their new home. And yet we won't be able to meet the demand tomorrow. That means the demand will continue for several years, decades. That's why we actually have to open up and say, okay, we're basically willing to throw overboard our understanding of what we think is correct care, right? It's a requirement which is longer term, yes, not just 5 days that we need nursing staff, but it's long term.
Exactly, but it is of course difficult. All European countries do this. If you say, of course, you have a training process, training in Germany has been generalized. I think that's a great step. We have a certain basis and say, okay, someone has to know this, so this standard has to be provided. And of course, there is also the fear of saying that we can't go down there, we can't dissolve it. And it's always a back and forth, taking in new aspects, yes, but we have to, otherwise we won't get any more recognition. And recognition is also primarily patient protection. We cannot forget that. We are not doing a recognition for the paperwork reason, but we are doing a recognition to ensure that patients get exactly the care they need. And I am absolutely in favor of innovative solutions. And I think there are many out there that we should hear more from. However, we need to define a standard. Otherwise, we are not talking about the same thing. And then it will be even more difficult.
So how do you measure your success? Is it evaluated what you do, or what is a successful consultation in the end when someone has been recognized and is well integrated? Or how do you determine that?
Yes. So what is good counseling? Counseling success is perhaps different compared to what the project has to achieve. So the counseling center consists of these two pillars. The information platform is evaluated in terms of how much use is made of it. And we will also regularly conduct surveys to determine which documents are frequently requested. This can be easily done digitally nowadays. Which documents are frequently requested, which information is clicked on the most, etc. So there will be a monitoring system to see what is useful and what, for example, is never requested. Then we can also remove that. We don't want any dead files on this information page just because it looks nice. We have the ambition to stay up to date. On the other hand, what is a successful consultation? For me, a sustainably good consultation is when we have accompanied the person until they have achieved their goal. So we have defined a goal of every counseling by the person seeking counseling and who says, I need you because I have to go through the recognition process, for example. Or we recently had the case of someone who said, I submitted the application 5 years ago, then life got in the way. I got pregnant, had a child, I have B2, but I never took a test for the language level. I failed twice because everything else in life was more important than passing this exam. And after 5 years, I finally have the time to do it. But I'm unemployed nowadays, I don't have any money for the exam. How can I finance it? And then the goal of the counseling is, okay, we're looking for a funding opportunity, how to do it. And there is, for example, the specialized language test that you can take, which is also supported by the Senate administration, so that you can prepare well for this B2 and pass these tests well. That would be the goal. So if she has taken the course and passed it, our counseling would then be considered successful. In this example, integration has nothing to do with it. It always depends on what the person seeking counseling defines as their counseling goal. And we then take that with us. We have many counseling sessions that are highly complex, which then also start with a counseling goal. And then something else comes up and then something else comes in and so on. We get different questions and then it takes a long time, but luckily we have the time and the resources to accompany it. We don't have to say after 2 hours of counseling, we must stop. It's no longer possible because each person only has so much time, but we are extremely open about it. We can do it for a really long time. That's nice.
Yes, very interesting. When we look into the future, what do you think? Will such counseling centers be necessary beyond Berlin? Or how do you see it? Or do you maybe even have contact with other counseling centers in other cities or federal states?
Not with a counseling center like us. I don't know of any. There are many counseling centers that I know of offer counseling on recognition. On this subject, there are actually many counseling services. They usually have a quantitative goal. That means so and so many counseling sessions in so and so many months and years, so that they get the funding, which then leads to a decrease in the quality of the counseling. They then have to go through as much as possible to achieve their goals. We don't have that pressure, and I have to say that I like that. I think counseling must be thought of holistically, and that is the opportunity we have, and that is missing. It is missing in many places. There is also a lack of expertise in bringing elements together. We actually take a holistic approach to the process, from recruitment to immigration, including which visa and which residence permit people have. I have companies that come to me and say, Miss Aust, we've got a nurse here that we'd like to employ, but she says she's got a student visa and there's nothing she can do about it at the immigration office. We then look into it and often find that it's not a student visa, but something other. And then we try to find a solution. How can it be changed so that the person can then work as a nurse? That doesn't always work. Unfortunately, we had also cases where I just have to say it won't work. It doesn't work that way. We have big problems with nurses from third countries over 45 years old. That means they must have a pension contribution in the blocked account, otherwise it won't work. And that is why, because if one is hired with an age over 45 as a third country national, they haven't made any pension contributions. Many countries have no recognized pension system, which is actually not available outside the EU. That means they are confronted with the problem that either they need a salary that allows them to save enough money until retirement or to pay into the pension fund, or a credit balance, or a fortune that can be put in a blocked account to make it work. And if, of course, I'm a nurse who comes here and I'm 49 years old and the employer says, yay, lots of experience, great, maybe even speaks excellent German. We have a huge problem in terms of immigration. And then finding solutions to talk to the Federal Employment Agency and to see what options there are to still find a way. These are consultations that almost no one actually does. So they're networking with the individual agencies, with the individual authorities, and also saying, come on guys, how do we find a way out of this problem is an important work of us.
What interests me is that I recently saw a documentary about deportations, and the difference is that they are not seeking asylum. That means they come here because they said in their home country that they would work in Germany. An agency said, okay, we found a company there that would hire you. Okay, that matches. So the person comes here, has to meet the requirements, and can then work here at some point. But of course, they are not German citizens, so they still have a foreign passport or the passport of their home country. What extent do these people then have to fear that they may also have to leave the country? What is the difference between someone who seeks asylum and someone who comes here to work? Because people who seek asylum also work here. Do they stay here?
That's quite clear. There are two completely different paths. There is the path of the Skilled Immigration Act. That means I have a potential employer, I have a qualification, or I come as a trainee. Then I have a school leaving certificate and I come to Germany with a visa that allows me either to look for an employer here, either to take up an apprenticeship or to pursue an occupation. Whether or not you need to obtain further qualifications is irrelevant in this context. But those are the three options. Either I come here to look for a job, to do an apprenticeship, or to work. And that always requires a visa, which clearly allows me to come to Germany and carry out this activity. This has nothing to do with deportation.
Does that mean that no one has to worry about having to leave?
No, unless the purpose has changed. So if they come to do an apprenticeship and can't do the apprenticeship, for example, then they have so much time to look for a new apprenticeship position. If they cannot find a new apprenticeship, then of course they have to leave. That's clear, of course. The word deportation has nothing to do with labor migration. So this is important to understand. When we talk about deportation, we are actually talking about those who have applied for asylum here. And there are also two very different categories. If someone has come to Germany and asked for asylum, then they will be included in the asylum procedure. At the moment still. That's the way it is. And in the asylum procedure, a decision can be made, either getting asylum, then everything is fine, then they can go to work, do everything. Even then, deportation is not an issue. Deportation becomes an issue if the asylum application is rejected. Then it goes from so-called permission to so-called toleration, and then they can be deported under certain circumstances. Due to the fact that the asylum application, that is the reason for being here, is no longer valid. But even then, there are again very different outcomes. You have to look at it. You can't be deported to all countries because it needs a bilateral agreement with the countries. So from that point of view, I always think it's very important that we look at this extremely clearly. What are we talking about? Because at the moment in politics, what is and is not possible is becoming very blurred. But legally, it is very clear.
Are there also requests from nursing professionals who at some point are ready to apply for German citizenship? And are you also the point of contact then?
Exactly, yes, we can do that. You know, it's not an uncommon case. It's more for nursing staff who are already here and have been working for a while. Many start out as assistants, then have to wait until they get their recognition. And as I said before, life gets in the way and then it takes longer. And it may well be that so much time has passed that you can apply for a national, that is a German passport, if certain requirements are met. We have the expertise to help with that, no problem. Exactly.
That almost brings us to the end, Debora, but I would be interested to know what your hopes are for the future. What improvements do we need? What would make your work easier? But what would also be helpful for the people who come here? What else could we be paying attention to?
I would hope, and I think this is also in line with my experience with the nursing staff and trainees who come from abroad, that companies don't think that integration happens on its own, that they have the courage to invest more in the integration of all employees. That would be my wish, that they would say, yes, this is something I invest in, and I also invest in my company because I believe in investing in my company, in my employees, in order to generate appreciation again. I think that's an extremely important point. That we always talk about care with people, but that a care facility is also to take care of their employees. And that means with all their employees, we have to teach appreciation again. We must get back to a point where we can say, Thank you for what caregivers do, because we will all grow old one day. That would be my wish. And I think it's also shared by many of the care workers and trainees who come here, that we should not forget social integration. There's a saying, we called for skilled workers, but people came. That we should perhaps think more about what it means to be human and how we can support skilled workers in this regard.
Great closing words, don't you think, Eva?
Yes, I agree. It doesn't just stop there when you've recruited the people, but the integration is then an ongoing process in which everyone in the facility should be involved, including the teams and so on. I think that came out quite well, and I'm sure you're a great support for the people in that regard. So yes, thank you very much for presenting your work. It was a lot of fun. The topic is always current and will be with us for decades to come. That's why it was an exciting insight.
I am curious to see whether other federal states will follow suit and possibly also introduce counselling centres so that it is simply made easier for everyone involved. For example, we had an episode with the Osnabrück Clinic and they did it all on their own. So there was one person who was responsible for it. Of course, it's great to have a decentralized counseling center that can then take care of a much larger area.
Exactly. That is also my experience. The clinics can afford to have a person in-house to do this. But there are far too many small care facilities that can't do that. And that's why I think it would be nice if other federal states could raise the money to establish a decentralized counseling center. So maybe we can be a small beacon.
I think that it also plays a role that people might come here and are not satisfied with their employer and want to change jobs. Then these questions on an individual level somehow remain, and that is why this counseling center might also be useful to look at the individual level.
That's another good point, because you are tied to your employer. Then that's exactly what you do. Yes, Debora, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us about the BBeFaP, the Berlin Counseling Center for Nursing Staff with Foreign Qualifications. If you have any questions, suggestions, or anything else, please feel free to contact us at übergabe.de. You are also welcome to discuss it with us in our community. We can also open the topic there. Of course, those affected are also welcome to contact us there. Anyone who has come here from abroad and might like to talk about their own experiences, maybe even good ones, is welcome to do so. Experiences, what worked well, then we all learn a little bit from it. So don't be afraid. You can find more information at übergabe.de. Eva, have a wonderful day, and thank you again, Debora.
Thank you very much for having me.
Do something good. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.